Have you ever wondered why the world is so quick to judge by what it sees, instead of pausing long enough to understand the heart beating underneath? Because that's exactly what happened here. Everyone else saw her as just a maid, a young woman with skin they were too proud to accept, but he saw something deeper. He saw her heart, and that small, defiant act, it changed everything. This isn't one of those sugar-coated love stories that fit perfectly on a greeting card. No, this is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's a rich heir choosing to risk every dollar, every friend, every family bond he's ever known, just to be with a woman the world told him he should never even look at. Sounds reckless, right? Maybe it is. But sometimes the most powerful proof of love is found in the chances we take that terrify us. And you know what's truly shocking? It wasn't a fairy tale castle that made them rich. It was the tiny, battered apartment they moved into. The nights they held each other through tears, laughed over burnt toast, planned dreams the world said were impossible. That's where real wealth was built. That's where they proved that love isn't about matching bank accounts or family names. It's about matching hearts, no matter how heavy the odds. So let me ask you, have you ever dared to love like that? To look past what's easy, what's comfortable, and choose something real, even if it means standing alone against everyone you've ever known? Because by the end of this story, you might start questioning what's truly worth keeping and what's worth risking it all for. Aaliyah had never set foot in a place so grand. The Carter estate was more than a mansion. It was a living testament to old money and unspoken power. The chandeliers seemed to whisper stories of lavish parties, of a family rich beyond most people's dreams. Yet as she walked through those gleaming halls, her humble heart carried only one mission: to help her struggling family. Being a young black woman here felt like wearing a neon sign that screamed outsider, something she couldn't peel off no matter how polite her smile. This was the world of a millionaire family, and she was just the help. But even then, she chose not to shrink. It's funny how life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if it doesn't feel that way. For Aaliyah, this was more than a new job. It was a silent challenge to prove that humility and quiet determination could exist right in the middle of cold marble floors and judgmental glances. Every time someone side-eyed her uniform, she repeated in her head, "Desister nunca foi opco." That was her mantra, because deep down, she carried a hope that her small sacrifices today might rewrite her family's destiny tomorrow. Isn't that what courage is all about? She spent the morning dusting priceless vases and aligning books worth more than her mother's entire house. Once, she accidentally caught her reflection in a gold-framed mirror and almost laughed. Here she was, a young maid wiping smudges off fortunes. Still, there was something in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been crushed by humiliation. She'd been rejected by many doors before, but this was her Rikamiko, her new beginning, and she promised herself she wouldn't let anyone steal it. Every quiet hour gave her time to replay her past. Nights she cried from sheer exhaustion. Mornings she went hungry so her little brother could eat. This wasn't just a job. It was her personal redemption. Whenever she felt doubt creep in, she'd whisper a simple prayer. "Lord, let me prove that love and hard work mean more than all this glittering wealth." Because even among crystal chandeliers, her soul longed for something money couldn't buy. A story of super KO, a story that would one day inspire someone else not to give up. But oh, the Carter family didn't make it easy. Most days, Margaret, the matriarch, barely acknowledged her existence. If she did, it was with thin-lipped smiles that felt like knives. Aaliyah often left rooms feeling more bruised by words unspoken than by hours of scrubbing. Yet she refused to let pride poison her gentle spirit. She chose grace over bitterness, proving to herself that even when humiliated, she could rise stronger. She was humiliated, but came out stronger. That would be her secret badge of honor. Sometimes when she stood by the vast windows, she wondered about the lives lived behind these velvet curtains. Did these people ever struggle with fear of tomorrow? Did they ever have to count pennies or pray over empty plates? The contrast between her life and theirs was almost cruel. Yet, ironically, it was here, in the belly of unimaginable luxury, that her story of amor prohibido was about to unfold. A love so unlikely it could only have been scripted by God himself. Late that afternoon, she paused to admire a painting of a garden. Maybe it was silly, but she imagined herself there, hand in hand with someone who didn't care about her skin color or the size of her bank account. Someone who saw her heart, not her uniform. Little did she know, destiny was already stirring those very threads. Sometimes God sets the stage long before the actors even know their lines. Her challenge was simply to keep her heart open, even when everything around her told her to build walls. As evening settled in, Aaliyah gathered her cleaning supplies and quietly thanked the Lord for getting through the day without a single tear. That might not sound like much to others, but after years of silent battles, it was a triumph. She still felt the sting of being watched like an intruder, judged by her skin before her soul. But she clung to the hope that one day, someone would truly see her. Not just see her standing there in a maid's dress, but really see her heart. Walking back to the tiny staff quarters, she replayed every awkward glance, every tight smile from the Carters. Part of her felt like running. But another part, the braver part, whispered, "Stay. You're here for a reason." She didn't yet realize that this mansion would soon become the backdrop of her greatest joy and deepest pain. That these echoing halls would witness tears, laughter, forbidden kisses, and a love that would change everything. And so Aaliyah laid down that night, on a narrow bed far removed from the Carter family's feathered mattresses, clutching her grandmother's old cross. Somewhere between exhaustion and prayer, she drifted off. She had no idea that tomorrow would crack open the door to a connection that would defy logic, challenge pride, and ultimately prove that true love isn't measured by money or heritage. It's measured by the courage to risk it all, and that risk was waiting just around the corner. The next morning, Ethan Carter returned home earlier than planned. Business had wrapped up quicker than expected, and he missed the familiar scent of his family's estate. But as he strolled through the echoing halls toward his father's old study, expecting solitude, he stopped cold. There, by the massive oak shelves, was Aaliyah, her delicate hands carefully dusting priceless books, her eyes focused with humble care. For a split second, Ethan was struck not by her uniform or her position, but by something else entirely, the calm strength she carried like an invisible crown. Aaliyah startled when she noticed him, nearly dropping a leather-bound volume. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know anyone would be in here," she managed, her voice trembling under the weight of old fears of rejection. Ethan shook his head, offering an awkward smile that was more boy than air. "Don't apologize. Please. You're just doing your job." That simple exchange was nothing and everything at once. It was the first crack in the cold wall that always stood between people like them. They lingered longer than necessary, talking about trivial things, the weather, the book she liked, how he'd once tried to read philosophy to impress a girl and failed miserably. Aaliyah laughed, a soft, surprised sound that seemed to dance in the air. Ethan found himself wanting to hear it again, even if that meant risking more than polite conversation aloud. Somewhere in that study, among books older than both of them combined, a tiny spark lit between their worlds. What neither of them spoke out loud was the obvious truth. This was a family rich enough to shape entire city blocks, while she was a young employee trying to keep her family afloat. It was a story as old as time, a son of millionaires, a humble maid, and amor prohibido. Still, when she tucked a curl behind her ear and smiled shyly, Ethan felt his heart tip dangerously. It was as if God whispered, "See past what the world sees. Look at her heart." Ethan found himself inventing reasons to keep the conversation going. "Have you read this one?" he asked, handing her a novel he hadn't touched in years. She took it, their fingers brushing, and something electric pulsed between them. Aaliyah pulled back as if burned, cheeks aflame. "I've always wanted to," she admitted, "but we couldn't afford books growing up." Her honesty humbled him more than any lecture his father ever gave about privilege. There was a silence that wasn't awkward, but loaded with something tender and dangerous. Ethan wondered what would happen if he closed a space between them, if he dared to touch the hand that still lingered on that book's worn spine. But even in that suspended breath, he knew what was at stake. His family's reputation, her livelihood, the centuries-old legacy of the Carter name. And yet, he risked everything for love isn't just a line in fairy tales. Sometimes it's the start of the bravest chapter. They parted with polite nods, but both walked away carrying something fragile and glowing. Aaliyah returned to her chores with a heart pounding in her chest, whispering, "Don't be foolish." Ethan, meanwhile, spent the rest of the day distracted, seeing her face in every polished surface. He questioned himself, battled silent wars of loyalty and curiosity, pride and something far softer. That night, he couldn't sleep, replaying her laugh over and over like a forbidden song. By candlelight, Ethan scribbled half-finished notes for his next business deal, but his mind wasn't on numbers. It wandered back to Aaliyah's gentle eyes, to how she looked when caught off guard, vulnerable yet unbroken. He knew his mother would despise even the thought. "A maid, Ethan? Have you lost your mind?" He could hear her icy voice echo. But another voice, deeper and older, urged him to let his heart wander beyond his gilded cage. Meanwhile, Aaliyah lay awake in her modest quarters, replaying every word Ethan had said. She tried to convince herself it meant nothing. Rich boys flirted for sport. Girls like her were just diversions. But then she remembered how he actually listened, really listened, how his eyes softened when she talked about the struggles her family faced. Maybe he saw more than my uniform, she thought. But hope was dangerous. It had broken her heart before, left her rejected and humiliated. Still, wasn't it a curious thing? How just one unexpected moment could change an entire destiny. As dawn threatened the horizon, both of them were wide awake, two restless souls circling the edge of something neither could name. Neither knew that soon, stolen cups of coffee and secret glances would follow, moments that would test every ounce of courage they possessed, moments that would teach them that sometimes love chooses the most unlikely hearts to write its story. It all began so innocently. Ethan started wandering into the kitchen around the same time every morning, claiming he needed stronger coffee than the staff usually prepared. Aaliyah tried not to notice. She kept her head down, wiping counters already spotless, reminding herself over and over that she was just a young maid in a millionaire's home. But then he'd say something unexpectedly kind or funny, and her heart would betray her with a little skip. Love has a way of slipping in through the smallest cracks. One morning, he offered to help dry dishes, awkwardly wielding a towel too fine for real work. "I think you've officially ruined my mother's linen," she teased, instantly regretting it. But Ethan only laughed, delighted by her spark. Good. Those linens needed a little rebellion. It was the first time she allowed herself to laugh so freely in his presence. She felt seen, not as the humble empregada, but as a woman worth sharing a private joke with. These moments grew, delicate as spider silk, and just as easy to break. Ethan found excuses to linger wherever Aaliyah worked. The greenhouse, the library, even the servant halls. His friends would have mocked him, called it a phase or worse. But when he watched her brush stray hair from her face with a tired sigh, his chest tightened. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, more dangerous. He was the herdero, the son of the millionaire, and she was everything his mother warned him against. Aaliyah tried to guard her heart, whispering to herself every night, "Remember who you are. Remember where you stand." She'd been humiliated before, chased out of rooms when someone decided she didn't belong. She couldn't survive that again. But Ethan's gentle persistence was hard to ignore. He'd drop little notes folded tight, tiny jokes, small encouragements, sometimes just her name written in a way that made her breath catch. It was a forbidden dance, one step from scandal. One afternoon, he found her in the garden, lost in trimming roses. "They're beautiful because they dare to bloom even when they shouldn't," he said, offering her a bloom. Aaliyah hesitated, then took it, feeling the weight of 1,000 unsaid warnings. Her fingers brushed his, and the contact sent an ache right to her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged, eyes earnest. "Because you're the first person here who doesn't see me as a Carter. Just Ethan." The irony wasn't lost on her. In a world that saw only her skin color and humble station, he was craving to be seen beyond his family's wealth. Their secrets grew like ivy, winding tighter each day. Ethan began dreaming of a life stripped of fancy titles and obligations. Just simple mornings with Aaliyah, coffee, and laughter. But Aaliyah lay awake at night, fighting hope with every breath. "He'll never choose you over them," she told herself. "No one ever does." It was safer to believe that. And yet, sometimes after he left, she'd touch the notes he gave her, tracing his words with trembling fingers. Giving up was never an option. She'd breathe, clinging to the foolish idea that maybe this time, love could be stronger than prejudice or pride. She remembered her mother's words. "Real love proves itself, child. It fights when the world says give up." Was Ethan that kind of man? Or was she setting herself up for a heartbreak that would leave her more shattered than before? Margaret started noticing, of course. Mothers of wealthy families always do. Her glances sharpened, lips pinched tighter whenever Ethan was near the kitchen. Aaliyah felt it like a chill down her spine, an unspoken threat. The stakes rose with every stolen smile, every casual brush of hands. And through it all, Aaliyah's heart battled between terror and an undeniable longing. Because against all logic, against all the whispered warnings, she was falling for the heir. One evening, as she cleaned the study, she found a note hidden among the books. "Meet me by the fountain tonight." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Was this the moment her heart would be broken? Or would it be the start of something they'd spend forever defending? She tucked the note close to her chest, torn between fear and reckless hope. It was a moment of decision, to step into the unknown or retreat into safe loneliness. But love never thrived in safe places. So as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the estate in gold and shadow, Aaliyah smoothed her dress and breathed deep. She didn't know if this would end in joy or devastation, only that she was done letting fear rule her steps. Her story was already bending toward the impossible, and maybe, just maybe, God was writing a chapter that would prove love really was stronger than history, prejudice, or even the cruel weight of money. That thought alone was enough to make her walk toward the fountain, heart pounding with both dread and wild, unstoppable hope. The night air was warm, wrapping the Carter estate in a hushed promise of secrets. When Ethan invited Aaliyah for a walk in the garden, she almost said no. Every instinct screamed it was dangerous, that she was a humble maid standing on the edge of a cliff with the son of a millionaire who could shatter her world with a careless word. But the way he looked at her, like he actually saw her heart when everyone else only saw her skin, made her whisper, "All right." Sometimes faith starts with the smallest surrender. They wandered through lantern-lit paths, surrounded by roses that seemed to lean in, eavesdropping on forbidden things. Ethan talked about trivial details, a failed deal, an old childhood scar, but his voice was different tonight, softer, almost afraid. Aaliyah tried to steady her breath, telling herself this was just a walk, just meaningless talk. But her heart drummed loud enough to drown out every safe thought. This was no ordinary stroll. This was a challenge to every rule written by families like his. Finally, by a marble fountain, Ethan stopped. His hands trembled as he reached for hers. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, the words spilling out in a rush. Aaliyah's throat tightened. This was the forbidden love her mother always warned about, the kind that started with stolen glances and ended with heartbreak. "Ethan, don't," she whispered, pulling back. But he held on gently, desperation clouding his eyes. "Please, just let me finish." He talked then, pouring out a raw truth that startled them both. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by luxury, but it never felt like mine. Not really. And now, all I can think about is how alive I feel when I'm near you. It scares the hell out of me, but also it feels like the only honest thing in my life." Aaliyah's eyes filled, tears threatening. Hearing the herdero admit his soul was as lonely as hers cracked something open inside her. Maybe love wasn't about matching worlds. Maybe it was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit yours. She turned away, trying to hide how badly she was shaking. "This isn't safe. Your family would never allow." But Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I don't care about safe. I care about you. I care about this. Even if the whole world stands against us." And there it was, the challenge, the dare that split her heart between terror and a yearning so fierce it made her breath catch. Against all odds, against all her careful walls, she found herself wanting to believe him. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. Her past was littered with broken vows, moments when men like him chose their reputations over girls like her. The memory of humiliation still burned fresh. But Ethan shook his head, his eyes locked on hers like he was trying to memorize every fear she carried. "Then let me prove it. Let me prove that I choose you. Not wealth, not legacy you." That promise danced on the knife edge between salvation and disaster. When he leaned in, she almost pulled away. Almost. But then their lips met, and it was like every harsh line drawn by society blurred in that one breathless moment. The kiss was tender, hesitant, but also hungry, like two hearts starved for the same impossible hope. She felt every argument, every caution slip through her fingers. This was reckless, dangerous, but it was also the most honest thing she'd ever felt. He risked everything for love wasn't just a story in dusty books anymore. It was alive in her racing pulse. When they finally parted, Aaliyah pressed her forehead to his, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't understand what this means. If we're caught," her voice broke. Ethan pulled her closer, whispering, "Then let them see. Let them see that love is stronger than their pride." In that fragile space, surrounded by moonlight and roses, they both knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But neither stepped back. They walked on after that, hands intertwined, every step heavier with the weight of what they'd just begun. Aaliyah's heart warred between dread and wonder. Was this the start of her ultimate humiliation, or the miracle that would prove the world wrong? As they disappeared deeper into the garden's shadows, neither suspected how quickly secrets could bloom into scandals, or how soon they'd have to defend this fragile new bond with everything they had. Their stolen romance unfolded in the quietest corners of the Carter estate, places where chandeliers couldn't spy and gossip couldn't breathe. Aaliyah would be dusting portraits or arranging flowers when a soft hand would brush hers, sending a shiver up her spine. Ethan slipped her little notes, simple words like "thinking of you" or "stay strong." Each one was a spark, reminding her that despite the mansion's cold splendor, there was a warmth growing just for them, fragile, forbidden, but oh so real. They found secret ways to be close. A wink across the dining hall when no one was looking, lingering touches when he'd accidentally run into her in the hallway. Sometimes they'd steal minutes in a linen closet, whispering dreams of running away to some tiny town where no one knew his last name or her humble station. In those moments, they weren't the millionaire's son and the maid. They were just two hearts daring to believe that love could rewrite destinies. Still, every giggle and tender touch carried the weight of terrifying consequences. Aaliyah lived on edge, flinching at every sudden footstep. What if Margaret found out? What if one of the other maids decided to whisper their secret to the wrong ears? She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her family relied on every paycheck. Yet each time Ethan's fingers intertwined with hers, she thought, Desi stir nunca foi opco. Giving up on this feeling was simply not an option. They'd meet by moonlight, sharing breathless kisses that left her heart pounding in ways she'd never known. Sometimes Ethan would press his forehead to hers and promise, I'd give up every cent, every inch of this place, just to keep you. Part of her wanted to believe it, to let his vows wash away every doubt. But shadows of past heartbreak whispered cruel reminders. Love was easy to promise, harder to prove. She'd seen too many men fold when pride and money were on the line. Their love wasn't just about sweet words or tender touches. It was about two people defying the heavy chains of a world built to keep them apart. Aaliyah often thought of her mother's tired hands, of her father's bowed shoulders. If they could see me now, she'd wonder. They might warn her to be careful, but part of her believed they'd also be proud. Because even though it was reckless, she was chasing something beyond survival. She was chasing a love that might heal generations of quiet wounds. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself pulled deeper every day. The boardrooms and power lunches that once thrilled him now felt hollow. All he wanted was to sit in a cramped kitchen with Aaliyah, laughing over stale bread, planning futures that defied every Carter legacy. His friends would call him insane. His mother would call it betrayal. But Ethan felt something inside him rising up, a need to prove that love wasn't about matching fortunes. It was about matching souls. Sometimes, lying awake in his vast bedroom, he'd replay her laugh, her trembling smile when he told her she was beautiful. He thought about how the world judged her skin color before her heart, how many times she'd been humiliated or rejected by people like him. Rage and sorrow tangled inside him, along with a fierce desire to show her that not every Carter was the same, that he could be the man who broke the cycle, who chose her over everything else. Aaliyah tried to keep a level head, reminding herself daily that fairy tales weren't written for girls like her. But then Ethan would sneak behind her while she polished silver, slip his arms around her waist, and whisper something silly just to hear her laugh. Those tiny moments built something vast inside her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, their love was stronger than every cruel rule written by old money and fragile egos. The mansion walls grew heavy with secrets. Servants began exchanging knowing looks, and a few cold smiles started curling in the corners of the house. But neither Aaliyah nor Ethan could stop. They were proving, to themselves and to anyone who dared watch, that love wasn't measured by wealth, but by the risks you'd take for it. Still, each hidden kiss felt closer to the edge of cliff. How long before their fragile world shattered? Because soon enough, secrets have a way of clawing into the open. And neither of them knew that Margaret's sharp eyes were already catching glimpses of truths they couldn't hide forever. Truths that would test not only their hearts, but also their courage to stand against everything and everyone they'd ever known. It was inevitable. Secrets, no matter how tender or carefully protected, always claw their way into the light. Margaret Carter had been watching closely, her sharp eyes piecing things together long before Ethan or Aaliyah realized. She noticed how her son would linger in hallways he once ignored, how Aaliyah's eyes sparkled with a joy that had no place in a maid's heart under her roof. Margaret prided herself on control over her fortune, her family's reputation, and especially her son's future. So when she walked into the library and found Ethan holding Aaliyah's hand, it felt like betrayal struck her to the bone. The room seemed to freeze under Margaret's icy glare. Her eyes locked on Aaliyah with a chilling contempt reserved for intruders who dared overstep invisible lines. "How dare you?" Margaret hissed, her voice a venom-soaked whisper. "Did you really think dusting our shelves gave you a right to my son's future?" Aaliyah's heart pounded, humiliation clawing up her throat. Her skin burned under the weight of old judgments, the kind that never bothered to see who she truly was beyond her uniform. Ethan moved quickly, stepping in front of Aaliyah like a shield. "Mother, please stop. You don't understand." Margaret let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Understand? Oh, Ethan, I understand perfectly. This girl sees a golden ticket, not your heart. She'd cling to anyone who could rescue her from her poor, struggling life." Aaliyah flinched, each cruel word cutting deeper than the last. It was the oldest, ugliest lie, that someone like her could never truly love someone like him. Aaliyah tried to find her voice, desperate to speak, to defend the love that had blossomed so carefully between them. But the words tangled, choked by the heavy shame of being exposed like this. Margaret leaned closer, voice dripping with threat. "You're finished here. Pack your things. And if you ever come near Ethan again, I'll make sure no one in this city ever hires you or your family." Her promise wasn't just personal. It was a crushing blow to everything Aaliyah worked for. Ethan's face drained of all color. "You can't do this," he burst out. "I love her." The words shattered something in the room, echoing against polished wood and generations of unspoken rules. Margaret's lips curled into a cold smirk. "Love? Don't be a fool. Love doesn't ask you to destroy your future. You are Carter. You have a legacy to protect, one you'll throw away for a passing fantasy with a maid." Her voice was so sharp it felt like it could cut straight through skin. Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes. This was the nightmare she'd always feared, being humiliated and rejected, her deepest feelings twisted into ugly motives. Still, even as shame burned through her, a tiny ember inside refused to die. Because while Margaret's words could slice through pride, they couldn't erase what Aaliyah and Ethan shared. It didn't stop it from hurting like hell. It just meant she'd have to survive it. Somehow, Margaret turned back to Ethan, lowering her voice to a deadly calm. "If you walk out that door with her, you'll lose everything. The trust funds, the properties, the name. You'll be on your own, stripped of everything we've built." It was a threat meant to chain him back to her world, gilded and suffocating. Ethan's shoulders drooped under the weight of it all, torn between the life he was raised for and the woman who made him dream of something entirely different. Aaliyah reached out, her hand trembling as it rested on his arm. "Don't ruin your life over me," she whispered. Her words cracked with pain, because part of her desperately wanted him to choose her, to prove that love could be stronger than wealth. But reality had taught her over and over how easily hearts were crushed under the weight of money and family pride. Still, her silent hope was a fragile thing she couldn't completely kill. Margaret's eyes flashed in victory. "Get out of my house. Now." The finality of it rang through the vast room. Aaliyah stood straighter, blinking back tears that refused to stop. She walked out with her head high, even as her heart broke. Each step felt like walking away from everything beautiful that had ever bloomed in her life. But deep down, a quiet voice reminded her this wasn't her ending, just a painful chapter. Ethan remained alone in the library long after she was gone, staring at the door as if he could will her back. His mother's threats pulsed around him, heavy as stone. But somewhere under all that weight, something new began to stir, a defiant need to prove that love wasn't just a fragile dream. It was a force powerful enough to tear down centuries of pride. And that silent promise inside him was already beginning to crack his old world apart. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his childhood room, surrounded by trophies, family portraits, and silent reminders of everything he stood to lose. His mind spun with Margaret's threats, the fortune he'd inherited without ever lifting a finger, the social ties that made people bow in respect. All of it felt like a golden cage. And at the center of his storm was Aaliyah's tear-streaked face, whispering for him not to throw away his life. But how could he pretend any of this meant more than her? Hours passed in tortured silence. Ethan replayed every memory with Aaliyah, her shy laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her family, the strength she showed even while humiliated. He realized he'd been living off borrowed pride his whole life, a rich boy clinging to his family's name. Meanwhile, this young woman, with so much less, walked through daily judgment with her chin high. It struck him how truly wealthy her spirit was compared to his. Ethan wandered the dark halls like a ghost, hand brushing the cold marble banisters that had once made him feel powerful. Now, every polished surface seemed to mock him. Was he really about to let generations of money decide who he could love? The thought made his stomach turn. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. A loyalty that had always bent to his mother's expectations finally began to break. And with that break came clarity. By dawn, Ethan knew exactly what he had to do. He found Margaret in the sunroom, sipping her tea like nothing had happened. "Mother," he said, voice firm in a way that surprised even him. "I won't live under your roof or your rules anymore. If keeping your fortune means giving up the woman I love, then I want none of it." Margaret's teacup trembled slightly, but she quickly masked it with a thin smile. "You're being foolish, Ethan. This infatuation will ruin you." He shook his head. "No, what would ruin me is knowing I let fear dictate my life, that I traded real love for empty pride. I won't be that man." Margaret's eyes hardened, her jaw clenching. "Then go," she whispered, voice tight with rage. "But don't come crawling back when reality crushes your little fantasy." Ethan stood straighter. "I won't, because even if we struggle, at least it'll be our struggle, not a gilded prison built on your conditions." Packing was surreal. He stuffed clothes into a single duffel, looking around a room that had once been his entire world. Trophies, designer suits, the scent of expensive cologne, all suddenly felt meaningless. What good was luxury if it came with strings that choked the life out of him? As he zipped the bag shut, Ethan whispered a silent promise that he would prove love was worth more than any inheritance, even if it meant starting from scratch. Finding Aaliyah wasn't easy. She'd returned to her small apartment on the poorer side of town, bracing for a life that no longer included impossible dreams. When Ethan knocked on her door, she opened it with tears already in her eyes. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she breathed. He dropped the bag at his feet and took her hands. "Choosing you. For once in my life, I'm choosing something real, not what my family's money decided for me." Aaliyah shook her head, overwhelmed. "You gave it all up?" Her voice cracked. Ethan smiled through wet eyes. "I didn't lose anything important. The only wealth I care about now is standing right in front of me." Then he laughed, shaky and raw. "Besides, who needs a mansion when I can have coffee with you in the tiniest kitchen, talking about everything and nothing?" It was the first time either of them felt truly free. They held each other for a long time, letting silent tears say all the things words couldn't. Aaliyah's heart raced with both terror and joy. Could they really build a life on love alone? It was risky, but looking into Ethan's eyes, she saw a man no longer shackled by pride or family pressure. Instead, he was hers completely, vulnerably, beautifully hers. Maybe this was the redefinition of what it meant to be rich. Hearts intertwined, futures uncertain, but together. Later, as they sat on her creaky couch, sharing a laugh over burnt toast, Aaliyah leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring. Bills, old prejudices, the uphill climb of starting from nothing. It all waited for them. But for the first time, none of that seemed bigger than the love they held between them. Somewhere beyond that tiny apartment window, the world was still cruel and judgmental. But inside, they had found something powerful enough to face it all. Starting over was nothing like the movies. Ethan and Aaliyah moved into a cramped, squeaky-floored apartment that smelled faintly of old paint and hope. Gone were the grand dining halls and silk sheets. Their new world had chipped mugs, wobbly chairs, and a constant draft. But somehow, laughing over instant noodles in that tiny kitchen felt richer than all the chandeliers Ethan had grown up under. It was here they began proving to themselves that love wasn't about polished surfaces, it was about building something real from scratch. Their days were filled with simple struggles. They juggled overdue bills, grocery lists scrawled on scraps of paper, and a second-hand couch that threatened to collapse under them. Sometimes they argued about money, about exhaustion, about nothing at all. But each time, they found their way back to each other, apologies whispered between kisses that tasted like relief. They were learning that true wealth was measured in forgiveness and laughter, not in dollar signs. Ethan picked up work wherever he could. A warehouse, a hardware store, even landscaping jobs that left his hands raw and blistered. At night, Aaliyah would rub lotion into his palms, her gentle touch healing more than just skin. "I never thought I'd be proud of calluses," he joked once, eyes bright with something deeper. Aaliyah smiled. "That's because you're earning something your family's money never gave you." A story worth telling. Aaliyah found work too, cleaning small offices and sometimes taking care of elderly neighbors for extra cash. Each paycheck felt like a tiny victory. When they paid the rent on time for the first time, they celebrated with cheap wine and slow dancing in the living room. It was their own private ballroom with creaky floors and walls that could barely contain the joy of proving they could stand on their own. Some nights, they lay awake whispering dreams. Maybe one day they'd open a little cafe together, with mismatched chairs and shelves of books for customers to lose themselves in. Maybe they'd adopt a dog, or take weekend road trips in a rusty pickup. None of these dreams sparkled with diamonds or yachts, but they gleamed with something far more precious, the freedom to shape their life together, without anyone else's shadow looming over them. Yet for all their joy, there were moments when the weight of the world pressed hard. Aaliyah would sometimes break down, whispering fears of never escaping the judgment tied to her skin color or her humble beginnings. Ethan would hold her close, promising, "I see your heart, not where you came from. That's the only truth that matters." And in those arms, Aaliyah found enough strength to keep fighting. Because against all odds, they were choosing love over legacy day after day. Their friends, the few who stuck by them, often said, "You two are crazy for throwing everything away." But Ethan would just smile. "No, we're proving that a love worth fighting for changes everything. It makes you rich in ways trust funds never could." Aaliyah would nod, her eyes shining with quiet triumph. They were rewriting what it meant to be successful, crafting a story where forgiveness and resilience were more valuable than old money. One morning, as they sat on the porch steps with cheap coffee warming their hands, Ethan turned to her and said, "You know what the best part of all this is? I wake up every day knowing I chose this. Chose you. That's a kind of freedom my family's money could never buy." Aaliyah laughed, brushing away tears. It was incredible how a life so stripped down could still overflow with blessings neither of them had ever known. Their humble apartment became a sanctuary. Its cracked walls heard more whispered dreams, apologies, and confessions than any mansion ever could. They filled the space with thrift store furniture, mismatched dishes, and the kind of laughter that only comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Every dented pot and faded curtain was a badge of honor, proof they were living a love that beat the odds. What they didn't realize was that beyond their fragile bubble, old wounds still festered. Margaret's heart, though hardened by pride, was not immune to seeing her son truly happy for the first time. And that unseen shift would soon echo into their small home, stirring questions of forgiveness, second chances, and whether even the deepest grudges could bend under the weight of genuine love. Months passed before Margaret finally allowed herself to face what she'd done. At first, she convinced herself Ethan would come crawling back, begging forgiveness for defying the Carter legacy. But days turned into weeks, then seasons, and her son never returned. Rumors trickled in from old family friends who whispered about Ethan's modest apartment and Aaliyah's hard-working hands. Each whisper was a tiny needle pricking Margaret's carefully built pride. Late one evening, she found herself wandering through Ethan's empty room, running her fingers over trophies that no longer seemed impressive. His laughter, once echoing off these grand walls, was gone. In its place was a heavy silence that pressed into her bones. Margaret sat on his bed, clutching a photograph of Ethan as a child, tears sliding down lines etched by years of control and cold judgment. She realized, maybe too late, that wealth meant nothing if it left you utterly alone. Pushed by a mix of guilt and desperate longing, Margaret decided to visit the small apartment Ethan now called home. The drive over was surreal, trading polished driveways and private gates for cracked sidewalks and tiny porches adorned with flower pots. When she finally stood at their door, her perfectly manicured hand hovered, uncertain. What was she even going to say? How could she bridge a gap built on years of prejudice and bruised hearts? When Aaliyah opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. Margaret stood there, suddenly stripped of all her rehearsed speeches. Is Ethan home?" she managed, her voice softer than she intended. Aaliyah stepped aside, silent but cautious. The living room Margaret entered was humble. Mismatched chairs, a thrift store coffee table. But it hummed with a warmth her mansion had never known. Ethan appeared from the small kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His eyes widened, emotions warring across his face. "Mother? What are you doing here?" Margaret swallowed, feeling more like a lost girl than a powerful matriarch. "I came to see how you're living, to see if maybe I was wrong." It wasn't an apology yet, but it was the first crack in a wall built over decades. Aaliyah hovered nearby, arms crossed protectively. Margaret took in the small touches of their life together. Photos of Ethan and Aaliyah laughing, notes on the fridge about grocery budgets, a tiny vase of wildflowers. "You look happy," she finally whispered, voice breaking. Ethan nodded, his eyes holding both caution and hope. "We are. It's not easy, but we've built something real here. Something your money could never give me." Aaliyah reached for his hand, a silent claim that Margaret no longer had the power to break. Slowly, Margaret sank into a chair, her composure crumbling. "I spent so long believing love was about keeping our name untarnished, that marrying into the right families would protect us. But I was wrong. Watching you throw it all away terrified me. But seeing you like this, so full of life, I wonder if maybe you found something I never did." Her words fell heavy in the small room, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Aaliyah hesitated, then quietly placed a mug of tea in front of Margaret. It was a simple act, but in that offering was a kind of tentative grace. Margaret took it with trembling hands, her eyes meeting Aaliyah's. "I misjudged you. I thought you were after his money. I didn't see how truly you care for him or how deeply he loves you. For that, I'm sorry." The words were awkward, stiff, but genuine. A tiny seed of reconciliation planted. They sat there for hours, awkward at first, but gradually sharing stories that peeled back old misconceptions. Margaret listened as Aaliyah spoke of her family, her dreams, her fears. In those quiet confessions, Margaret saw not a threat to their legacy, but a woman of profound strength and grace. Someone who had endured humiliation yet still offered kindness. Someone who might just heal old wounds by teaching them all what love was supposed to look like. When Margaret finally left, there was no sweeping forgiveness, no perfect closure, but there was the fragile start of something new. A chance for hearts long hardened by pride to soften, for history's cruel patterns to break. Ethan stood with his arm wrapped around Aaliyah, watching his mother drive away, a quiet hope settling in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they were proving that love could change even the most stubborn destinies. Their wedding wasn't held under crystal chandeliers or in a vast cathedral. Instead, Ethan and Aaliyah chose a small park on the edge of town, where wildflowers danced in the summer breeze and children's laughter floated through the air. Friends gathered on mismatched folding chairs, smiling as they wiped away happy tears. There were no golden invitations or orchestras, just a humble arch draped with simple white cloth and two souls who had chosen each other against every odd. Ethan wore a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, while Aaliyah glowed in a delicate dress borrowed from a friend. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tiny bouquet, but when their eyes met at the altar, everything else disappeared. In that moment, there were no wealthy families, no heavy expectations, no scars from past humiliations. Just a man and a woman who proved that love wasn't about matching fortunes. It was about matching hearts. Margaret arrived just as the ceremony began. She stood off to the side, hands twisting a lace handkerchief, eyes glassy with emotion. Seeing her son beam at the woman she once tried to push away cracked something wide open inside her. When the officiant invited anyone with objections to speak, Margaret surprised everyone by stepping forward. The crowd held its breath, but instead of words of protest, she simply took Aaliyah's hands and whispered, "Welcome to our family." Tears ran freely down Aaliyah's cheeks. Ethan squeezed her hand so tightly she thought her fingers might break, both of them trembling with the enormity of what just happened. This wasn't just a new beginning for them. It was a quiet redemption for old hurts. Margaret's acceptance, fragile as it was, proved that love could soften even the hardest hearts, rewriting legacies built on pride and silent prejudice. After vows that were more laughter and tears than perfect speeches, Ethan kissed his bride under the shade of a giant oak. Their guests erupted into cheers, throwing handfuls of wildflower petals that clung to Aaliyah's curls and Ethan's jacket. Nearby, Margaret stood next to Aaliyah's mother, two women from worlds apart, smiling through tears, realizing maybe, just maybe, this union was mending more than two families. It was mending old stories. Their reception was a picnic of simple foods: fried chicken, fresh bread, and slices of homemade pie. There were no crystal goblets or tuxedoed servers, only paper plates balanced on knees and children chasing each other through the grass. Yet Ethan couldn't remember ever being happier. As he pulled Aaliyah into a dance under strings of twinkling lights, he whispered, "Who needs a ballroom when the whole skies are ceiling?" Aaliyah laughed, head tipped back, her joy spilling out in pure music. Nearby, their parents talked quietly, healing riffs with awkward smiles and tentative stories. Each laugh that crossed between them was a tiny bridge built over years of distance. Watching it happen, Aaliyah realized they were all proving something important, that love could heal wounds that money and social climbing never could. As evening settled, Ethan and Aaliyah snuck away to sit under their favorite oak. They talked about futures filled with messy kitchens, possible children, maybe even a little cafe where they'd serve pies baked with old family recipes. None of it was certain. The world was still the same, often cruel, still whispering judgments. But sitting there, hand in hand, they felt ready for every challenge, because their hearts had already survived the hardest storms together. At one point, Aaliyah pressed her ear to Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat that had once terrified her. How easy it would have been to walk away before all this began, to let fear of humiliation or financial ruin dictate their story. Instead, they proved that courage wasn't about never trembling. It was about trembling and still choosing to stay, still choosing each other again and again. They didn't know what the next chapters held, only that they would write them together day by day with forgiveness, laughter, and a kind of wealth no trust fund could ever buy. As fireflies began to flicker in the dusk, Aaliyah smiled up at Ethan and whispered, "Ready for forever?" He grinned back, eyes full of wonder. "With you? Always." And somewhere in that gentle night, history quietly changed. All because two people chose love over every reason not to. So after hearing their story, after seeing how love stood up to pride, wealth, prejudice, and even history, let me ask you something real. Who or what have you been afraid to stand up for? Is there a love you've hidden because the world might judge it? Is there a dream you've pushed down because your family or friends told you it was reckless? What if the greatest chapters of your life are waiting on the other side of that fear? What if true wealth isn't about your bank account or your last name, but about the hearts you dare to hold close, even when it costs you everything safe and familiar? If Ethan and Aaliyah's story taught us anything, it's that love worth fighting for doesn't come wrapped in perfection. It comes with sacrifice, messy nights, tear-streaked apologies, and brave mornings where you choose each other all over again. That's how you build a life that history remembers. Not because of your fortune, but because you proved love was stronger than every reason to walk away. Now, tell me in the comments, what would you risk it all for? Who would you stand beside, even if the world turned against you? Let's talk about it, because sometimes your courage sparks someone else's breakthrough. And hey, if this story touched you, or made you see love a little differently, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and join us here. Because there's so much more to explore about love, redemption, and the beautiful ways life surprises us when we least expect it.